He shot her 3 times, with a shotgun, in their bedroom, in the bed they shared. And then he walked downstairs. And he went to sleep, not fled, not panicked, not called anyone in a spiral of remorse. He pulled a blanket over himself somewhere in that house, and he closed his eyes while his wife's body was upstairs. That single detail, the sleeping, is a behavioral detail that I cannot stop turning over my mind, because it tells us something profound and disturbing about the psychological state of Stephen Bowen in the hours after he allegedly killed his wife, Coral Springs Vice Mayor Nancy Metayer Bowen, on the night of March 31st, 2026. It tells us this was not a man shattered by what he had done. It tells us this was a man who had, in some way, already made peace with it. And that is where this case stops being a news story and becomes something we need to examine much more carefully. Because the question is never just what happened. The question that matters, the one that might actually protect someone, is why. And more than that, how does a person get there? How does a man arrive at the moment where shooting his wife feels, on some level, like a solution? Stay with me, because the psychology of this case runs deeper than anything the headlines captured. If this is the kind of story that keeps you up at night, not just because it's dark, but because you genuinely want to understand how human beings are capable of this, then this channel was made for you. Subscribe to Psychology of Crime right now. Click the bell so you don't miss a single episode. And if this case matters to you, like this video. Not for the numbers. For Nancy. For every story that deserves more than a headline.
Thank you to everyone who came out bright and early to help keep Coral Springs beautiful, especially the amazing group of teens who joined me. Your energy, teamwork, and heart for service truly inspire me. I'm so proud to work alongside you all to make a real impact in our community. Let's keep it going.
I chose integrity, but when I think about integrity, it's rooted in truth, equity, and community, because if you do right by people, you'll be able to advocate for them in that way.
To understand what Stephen Bowen allegedly did, we first have to understand who Nancy Metayer Bowen was. Because an intimate partner homicide, the victim's identity, trajectory, and power are almost never incidental to the crime. They are frequently central to it. Nancy was 38 years old, a first-generation Haitian American who grew up in Coral Springs, Florida. She earned a Bachelor of Science from Florida A&M University and then a Master of Health Science from Johns Hopkins, one of the most selective graduate programs in the country. Before she entered politics, she was an environmental scientist who led disaster recovery efforts across Florida after multiple hurricanes, worked on water crisis response, and was recognized by the United Nations for her advocacy on clean water access. In 2020, she ran for city commissioner in Coral Springs and made history, the first Black woman and first Haitian American ever elected to that commission. She ran for re-election in 2024 and won unopposed. She served as vice mayor. She was vice chair of the Florida Democratic Party.
So excited for the new field. So thank you to our Parks and Recs team for making that happen. It was definitely a beautiful moment. I also welcome 2 outstanding young leaders as our vice mayor for the day.
The Kamala Harris campaign selected her to lead voter mobilization efforts across her community. And in the week she was killed, she was preparing to formally announce a run for the U.S. Congress. Let me put that trajectory plainly. This woman was going from local government to the national stage. She was accelerating. And the people around her, colleagues, mentors, political allies, they all saw it. They were all watching it happen in real time. Now hold that image. Hold the image of a woman ascending, visibly, publicly, undeniably, and ask yourself what that kind of upward momentum might feel like to the person standing right beside her. Because here is what psychology tells us about intimate partner violence in relationships where there is a significant power or status imbalance. Resentment and control are almost always part of the picture. We are not talking about a sudden explosion of emotion out of nowhere. We are talking about an internal erosion that can take months or years, a slow accumulation of feelings a person may never voice, may never fully acknowledge even to themselves, until something shifts and the pressure finds an exit. Stephen Bowen was 40, a radiology technician at Delray Medical Center. By all accounts a functional, employed, community-involved man. He was a Freemason. He was involved in a faith-based nonprofit. On social media, He described himself as God, husband, armed. He posted photos of himself at shooting ranges. He had a documented fascination with firearms. None of that individually is a crime, but as a profile, when placed alongside what we now know, it starts to form a shape. His only criminal history in Broward County was 2 misdemeanor drug arrests that prosecutors never pursued. No domestic violence filings. No restraining orders. No police calls to their home. Not a single documented incident that would have flagged this marriage as dangerous. And that clean record, that absence of visible evidence, is one of the most psychologically significant facts in this entire case. Because research on intimate partner homicide consistently shows that the most dangerous abusers are often not the ones who have already been caught. They are the ones who have learned, consciously or not, to contain what they feel, to perform normalcy, to be, publicly, the good husband, the community man, the one who posts anniversary photos and writes cheers to love, growth, and building a beautiful life together, while something else entirely is happening underneath. The question is not whether Stephen Bowen felt something dark toward Nancy in those final weeks or months. The question, psychologically, is what was and when it started. Here is what we know about the 24 hours before the shooting. On Tuesday afternoon, March 31st, Stephen called his mother and told her he had experienced a panic attack at work. He said he was going to go home and talk to Nancy about it. His mother, who later spoke to police, said she had no awareness of any marital problems between the two. That call is interesting. Behaviorally, it could suggest genuine distress, a man overwhelmed, reaching out, trying to manage something internally. Or it could, in retrospect, read differently, like someone creating a record, establishing a narrative. He wasn't well. He was struggling. He didn't know what he was doing. We cannot know which interpretation is correct, but we have to notice it. What happened in that house that Tuesday evening? What was said between Nancy and Stephen? What the argument or conversation or silence looked like? We don't know. That truth died in that bedroom. What we do know is that at some point that night, Stephen Bowen went upstairs with a shotgun, and he used a pillow, with burn marks and string wrapped around it, fashioned into a makeshift silencer, to muffle the shots. That pillow is the psychological pivot point of this entire case. A makeshift silencer requires forethought. It requires preparation. You do not grab a pillow and tie string around it in the middle of an emotional breakdown. That is a deliberate act, a calculated act. It suggests that either the decision to kill had been made before that evening, or that somewhere in the escalation of whatever happened in that bedroom, Bowen's mind shifted into a mode of planning rather than reacting. Both possibilities are disturbing, but they are psychologically different from each other, and they matter enormously in terms of what was happening inside this man's mind. Forensic psychologists have a term for this: organized versus disorganized offense behavior. A disorganized crime is chaotic, impulsive. It leaves a mess of evidence because the person was not thinking about consequences. An organized crime is methodical. The perpetrator is thinking about concealment, about the aftermath, about survival. The pillow is organized behavior. The garbage bags, because Nancy's body was found wrapped in blankets and placed inside black garbage bags. That is organized behavior. Sleeping downstairs and leaving in the morning as if going to work. That is organized behavior. And this is where the psychology deepens into something genuinely haunting. He went to his uncle's house. His Uncle Owen's small. He showed up and he asked Owen to hold on to a shotgun for a couple of weeks. And Owen, because he is the kind of person who could not just absorb that without asking, looked at his nephew and asked him directly, "Did you shoot someone?" And Stephen Bowen told him everything. He said he had shot his wife 3 times the night before. He described what he had done with her body. And when Owen asked him why, he said, "I couldn't take it anymore." Now here is what I want to focus on, because this moment is psychologically extraordinary. He told his uncle he didn't have to. He could have handed over the bag, made small talk, and left, but he confessed. And there are really only a few psychological explanations for that. One possibility is that some part of him wanted to be stopped, that the confession was an unconscious call for intervention, the kind of behavior we see in people who are not fully integrated into their own actions, who are in a dissociative or shock state and gravitating toward human contact. Another possibility is that he was trying to control the narrative, telling his uncle his version first, on his terms, before the story broke another way. A third possibility is simpler and maybe darker. He thought his uncle would protect him. He thought family loyalty would hold. It did not. Owen Small called 911. He gave police the information they needed to enter that home without a warrant, and he was the reason Nancy's body was found the same day. Stephen Bowen was arrested that afternoon at an apartment complex in Plantation, where surveillance had tracked him disposing of the weapon with another man he had told police was a fellow Freemason he'd met to discuss an upcoming lodge meeting. When officers closed in, according to the affidavit, he said, "Oh shit, they're here for me." Not what's happening. Not confusion. Recognition. Total, immediate recognition. Now, I want to bring in one more layer, because this case does not exist in a psychological vacuum, and the context matters. In the months before her death, Nancy had buried her younger brother Joshua. He was 26. He died by suicide after years of battling schizophrenia, a condition many believe was significantly worsened by the trauma he carried as a survivor of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School mass shooting in 2018. Nancy had lived through that with him. She had watched her brother fight and lose, and she was still standing, still moving, still planning a congressional run that would have included advocating for gun control and mental health funding. The irony of that, the particular awful irony, is almost too painful to say directly. A woman who survived the aftermath of a mass shooting through her brother, who was about to go to Washington to fight against the kind of violence that destroyed his life, killed by a gun in her own home by the person she trusted most in the world. So what do we do with all of this? What does the psychology of this case actually ask us to examine? I think it asks us to look more carefully at the cases where there is no visible record, where the home looks fine from the outside, where the anniversary posts are warm and the smiles are real, or at least look real. Because the research tells us that coercive control, the kind of emotional and psychological domination that precedes many intimate partner homicides, frequently leaves no paper trail. It lives in the texture of a relationship, in the things that are never said in public, in the particular way a woman learns to keep her home life separate from her public self. Not because she's ashamed, but because some part of her knows that naming it makes it real. We do not know with certainty what the interior of Nancy and Stephen's marriage looked like. We may never fully know. What we do know is that she is gone, that a man who described himself as armed on his public profile shot her in their bedroom with a shotgun and then performed the ordinary act of sleeping, and that when confronted, the only explanation he offered, the closest thing we have to a window into his psychology, was that he couldn't take it anymore. So here's what I want to ask you, and I want you to really sit with these questions, because they matter beyond this case. What does it mean psychologically when someone describes their victim, their wife, as something they can no longer take? What does that language reveal about how he perceived her? Was Nancy's success something he experienced not as a source of pride, but as a source of threat? Is it possible that her ascending power, her visibility, her momentum, her growing independence on a national stage created an internal crisis in a man whose identity was structured around being the one in control? And if that's true, what does it tell us about the warning signs we need to be looking for? Not in criminal records and police reports, but in the quieter, harder-to-name dynamics that exist long before a crime ever occurs? Leave your analysis in the comments. I want to know what you think was happening inside this relationship. What behavioral red flags stand out to you? What do you think "I couldn't take it anymore" really means? Subscribe to Psychology of Crime. Click the bell. Share this video with someone who thinks about people the way you do. Because understanding the mind behind the crime is not just fascinating. It is how we start to see what others miss before it is too late.